Before we start learning about layers, we need to go through the same process every time when we begin an AutoCAD drawing. I will walk you through these steps probably at least through over half of the semester. You're probably going to get really tired hearing me say these things, but I think it's important that you get into the habit of doing things in a particular order. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come down to the window icon in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And then we are going to go to our AutoCAD 2020 and we're going to select AutoCAD 2020. Once it opens, your screen should look similar to mine. First thing we want to do is to go to the big red A and we want to select New. Once we select New, it's going to bring up our template files. Currently, we are going to be using the AutoCAD.dwt template file. At this point, it has nothing in it, but a template file can hold a lot of information. When you go to work for a company, they are probably going to have template files already set up depending on what you're doing. In that file, they could have layers, which we're going to talk about today. They can have line types, they can have text styles, they can have pre-created blocks. There are a number of things that can be in this template. And you'll notice template is a .dwt, where our AutoCAD drawings are going to be .dwg. So I'm going to say open. The first thing I want to do is turn my grid off in the background. And then the second thing I want to do is to make sure that my dynamic input is off. If I type in my command line DYNMODE and hit enter, that number that's in the parentheses should be 0. So I'm going to say 0. Once you become more experienced with AutoCAD, you are welcome to use dynamic input, but at this point I prefer that you turn it off because it can cause you a lot of headaches, and I don't want you to have any more headaches with AutoCAD than you have to have. The next thing we need to do is we need to go back to the red A or the application menu, and we need to go to Save As, and we need to save our drawing. Again, I'm going to tell you where to save your drawing, what to name your drawing, all of that information. So I'm going to go to my OneDrive and I'm going to pick my course just like you're going to, and I'm going to put it in a folder and I'm going to call it Test. That way I know I can get rid of it. And I'm going to hit Save. And it asks me if I want to replace it because I already have that file there, and that's fine. So now I have my drawing saved, as you can see up here. I have named my drawing correctly, and now I am ready to set my units. So again, I'm going to go to the red A or the application menu, and I'm going to go to Drawing Utilities, or I can just type in Utilities. I don't have to go to the A to do that, and I want to go to Units. Again, I have several choices of units to pick from. I have decimal, I have architectural, engineering, etc. I'm going to leave it at decimal. And again, typically I'm going to tell you what to set the precision to. This is set to 4 numbers after the decimal point. So I'm going to leave it set at that, but I will typically tell you what to set your precision at. And then I'm going to say OK. The next thing that I always want to be in the habit of doing is checking my autosave. So if I go back to the application menu and I go to Options, and I go under Open and Save, right here I want to A, make sure there is a check mark in automatic save, and B, I want it set for 5 minutes. Also, while I'm in here, if your crosshair does not go totally across your screen horizontally and vertically, you may want to make that adjustment here at this point. And say Apply and say OK. Today we are going to learn about layers. So at this point, from this class on, you must use layers. This will be a new step in our starting process of setting up layers and getting you used to doing that. But at this point, you don't know how to do that. So we are going to start talking about layers. In the first video, we talked about the importance of layers, why we use layers, what layers are, and all of that. So I'm not really going to repeat that during this video. If you're not familiar with that aspect, go back and watch the first video. If we are under our Home tab, you'll notice here in the middle, we have our layers. If we click on the stacked papers here, it will take us into our layer properties dialog box. So let's look at a couple of things here. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to make sure everything is stretched out so that you can see all of the different categories. So this first category, and you'll see there's a little line, vertical line between each category. If I put my cursor over it, you'll see it will give me arrows and I can stretch it out so I can actually read what is in that box. So right now, mine are all pretty much stretched out, but make sure that yours are. You should be able to see status, name, on, freeze, lock, plot, color, line type, line weight, transparency, new, VP freeze, and description. I want you to be able to see all of those fairly clearly. So we can create our layers on our own. Right up here at the top, you're going to see 4 little icons. The first one, if I put my cursor over it and hold it, it says new layer. This is how I can create a new layer. So I'm going to click on that and you'll see it created a layer. Now I want to back up for a second because when we opened this drawing, you saw that there was a layer 0. The layer 0 is automatically in every single drawing and you cannot delete it. I refer to layer 0 as the sacred layer. You should never draw on layer 0. Layer 0 is primarily reserved for drawing blocks, which we will talk about later. So far, in all of your assignments, you have drawn on layer 0 because that was the only layer in your drawing. You will notice that layer 0 is white. When I ask you to create layers, in most circumstances, I am not going to assign white as a color to one of those layers. That is a clue for you that if you're drawing something and it is white, then you are on the wrong layer. You should never have a layer that is white in color when you're drawing. I do that intentionally to help prevent you from drawing on layer 0 and getting in the habit of that. So we've created our new layer. You'll notice over here on layer 0, it has a green check mark in it. That green check mark represents that that is the current layer. So if I started drawing right now, even though I've created this other layer that I haven't named yet, I'm going to be drawing on layer 0. So when we get ready to actually start drawing things, we'll need to move that check mark to the layer we want to draw on. The next thing is naming it. Now in the first presentation, I talked about how we name mechanical layers versus architectural layers. Again, every office will have a naming criteria that they use for their layers, but we're going to keep ours pretty simple today. And especially since this is kind of a mechanically based class, we are going to just keep our layers simple. A lot of times in mechanical drawings, you're not going to have a whole lot of layers. In architectural drawings, you can have hundreds of layers. So it's very, very important that these are named logically and that they represent what they truly are. So I'm going to start out and I'm going to create a layer called Object. Now to be able to type into a box, all I have to do is click into it until it gives me the blue and then I can change it. So I typed in Object. We will come back to on, freeze, lock, and plot. But what I want to talk about next is color. If I click here, you'll see it brings up my color index. There are many, many colors to pick from. You do not want a drawing with all of these colors in it. A lot of times right here are the main colors that we use. These are what AutoCAD considers the basic colors. And a lot of times, as they're listed, when we set up the plot style to it, they'll kind of be in this order, like that would be your lightest line and continue up. But again, every office is going to have their own standards. The other thing you'll notice is when I click like over the red, or I hold my cursor over the red, right above that it says index color 1. If I go to the yellow, it says index color 2. If I pick one up here, it says index color 64. Over to the right, you will see it gives me the red, green, and blue numbers to make up that color. So this particular color has a 95, 127, 0, meaning it has a 95 of red, 127 of green, and 0 of blue to make that color. When I pick on this one, not only does it tell me color 1 index color, it also tells me the actual color name. So if I click blue, it's going to give me that. Now if I click in one of these, it goes back again to the index color. So I'm going to start out with my object, and again, on my screen visually, anything that I want to be a bold line, I usually make a very bold color. So green really stands out on a black background. So does yellow, cyan, magenta. Those all stand out really well. Red doesn't stand out as well. The blue, I will never use the blue in my demonstrations because it's very hard for you to see. And of course white will stand out, but we're not going to use white, and then the grays are also available. So I'm going to pick green and I'm going to say okay. Now you'll notice the little box here changed to green. The next thing I have to do is I have to determine what the line type is going to be. In this case, an object line is a continuous or a solid line, so I don't need to change that. So when I get to a hidden line or a center line, we'll go in there and look about how to do that. The next thing is line weight. We typically keep this at default because, again, our line weights that print are tied to the colors. So we don't need to set any line weight defaults in this particular area. Transparency. We use transparencies a lot to make lines lighter and such, but with the way that CAD works now with our printers, we don't really need to do that. New VP freeze. This we'll talk about later in the semester, but this is another way to freeze and turn off some of your layers. We always want to put a description. This is pretty obvious. An object is an object. But we want to come in here and always put in a description. Object lines. So now we have created a new layer. So let's go ahead and create another layer. And again, it's going to copy because I have this one highlighted. When I click on a new layer, it's going to copy these characteristics into my new layer, other than the name. But you see it stayed green and everything else, the description stayed the same. So now I'm going to type in hidden because I want to use this as my hidden line layer. So I'm going to come over here to my color again. And this time I'm going to pick red. Now I do need a different line type. I need a hidden line type. So if I click here, you'll see it's going to take me into my select line type. But I only have one in here. There are certain things in AutoCAD that are outside of our drawing but is accessible through the program, because if they brought every line type into our drawing before we ever used it, it's automatically going to increase the size of our file. So we have to sometimes load things in to the particular drawing that we're working on. So to do that, I'm going to go down here to the load button. And now you see it has load or reload line types. And you can see there are a lot of different line types here. You can also create your own line types and add them. You can do customization with this, but we are not going to do that. You'll notice here in the beginning we have some ISO lines. That's the International Standards Organization. So if you work for a company that uses those standards, then you would be using these particular line types. Then you have some that are just by their actual name. So I'm going to scroll down and you see they're alphabetical. You see there's one that's like a fence line, one that's a gas line. You have your hidden. We have a hot water supply. We have railroad tracks. We have a zigzag line. So there are a lot of interesting lines in here that we can use. You'll notice with hidden, we have hidden 2, and we have hidden times 2. Hidden is typically the one we are going to use. If we want our dashes to be smaller and closer together, we can use hidden 2. If we want our dashes to be larger and spaced farther apart, we can use hidden ×2. So I'm going to select hidden and I'm going to say OK. Now it brought it into my box. If I just went ahead and said OK here, I'm still going to get a continuous line because that is what is highlighted. So for me to add this hidden line to this particular layer, I have to click on hidden before I do that, and I say OK. So now I actually have a hidden line type. So now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to change this to say hidden lines. I'm going to go ahead and create one more layer just so we have some things to play around with. So I'm going to click on my new layer and I am going to name this one center. And again, I'm going to come over and I'm going to pick a different color. This time I'm going to pick yellow. And I also am going to change this to where I have a center line type. So I'm going to click here where it says continuous. And I'm going to go to load. And I'm going to scroll down to where I have center. Again, I have center, center 2, and center ×2. But I want center. So I'm going to say OK. Now again, it's highlighting my continuous. So I have to make sure I click here on center and say OK. So now I have created 3 different line types. And I'm going to come over here and change this to center lines. Eventually, like if I close this, went back to it, it puts it in alphabetical order. So all of our layer names will be alphabetical. So I'm going to start with my object line. And I can double click here, and now you notice the check mark came here, and I can make that my new layer, or I can right click and I can go set as current layer, however I want to do it. The other thing you'll notice is that up here now, this actually says that particular layer, and we'll talk about this more here in a minute. So again, I can either click on the X and close this, or I can click there and just make the main part of it go away. That way I can get back to it very quickly if I want to go back to it. So as I said, up here now we have it showing our object layer. If I go to the pull down, you're going to see all of my layers. So I don't always have to go into my layer properties. Used to, they didn't have this. Once they added this, this was very, very convenient for changing layers. So right now I'm on my object layer. Say I want to be on my center layer. Well, now I'm on my center layer. If I want to go on to my hidden layer, now I'm on my hidden layer. That's much, much faster than having to go into here and change my layer. So I'm going to put this back on object. And I'm going to draw a circle, and I don't care how big or whatever the circle is, so I'm just going to draw it. And now you see that it's a circle with a green line. So now I'm going to switch to my center layer and I'm going to draw another circle, and you see I have a yellow circle with a center line type. Now I'm going to switch to hidden and I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm going to do the same thing. So now I have a circle with a red hidden line type. So visually, again, it helps us learn how to read our drawings as far as what objects are. You get used to things being green, you get used to things being yellow, you get used to things being red. So those things are easy to find in our drawings. So let's go back, because there's a couple of things here we need to talk about that we didn't talk about. This first category here is called on, and then next to that we have freeze. You notice on has light bulbs. Freeze has the suns showing. What on does, on actually turns our layers on and off, and that's how we control what we see on our drawings. On is kind of an old school command. What on does is it turns it off, but if there are elements tied to it, sometimes it'll leave little traces on your screen. So it's kind of annoying. So I don't ever use on and off, because my freeze basically does the same thing, but it doesn't leave anything on my screen. So if I wanted to turn off my center layer, if I click on that little sun, you'll see that yellow circle that was down here went away. I can click on it and bring it back. It doesn't mean that it's gone out of my drawing. It just means that I've turned it off so that it's not interfering with what I'm trying to do. My object layer, I can do the same with it. You see the green one went off. If I try to do that with the hidden, it's going to give me this error. This layer cannot be frozen because it is the current layer. I can still turn it off, but I would have to switch layers. And that's another reason for using freeze over on off. If I just turn that current layer off, it's going to ask me and I say, okay, go ahead and turn the current layer off. So again, that went away. So I forget that I did that, and I come over here and I start drawing some more circles. And I'm like, my circle command is not working. What is going on? Because I forgot that I turned that off. Now when I come back and I turn this on, now I have all of these circles. So that is another reason for using freeze over on off, because with freeze, it's not going to let me draw on it until I switch layers. So that keeps me from making a lot of mistakes. So that's kind of a nice feature too. So again, I would not use on and off. I would only use freeze and thaw. The next one is a really nice feature too, and it is called lock. I'm going to click on my center, and you notice it has a little lock on it that's open. If I click on it, now that little lock is closed. Okay, and you'll notice too that the yellow, look at the yellow, when it's on it's brighter, when it's locked it's lighter, so it kind of helps me know that. Also, if I put my cursor over it, you'll see that a little lock appears there, so I can remember that it's locked. So what lock does is it's going to keep me from making some mistakes. Say this is a column and I'm doing some changes to my drawing and I don't want my column to ever move. So if I grab all of this stuff to do move, you'll see everything moved but the layer that was locked. If this was my column and I did not have this locked, I could accidentally grab all of that and move it. And that would be a big, big mistake. So using the lock can help keep things that we don't ever want them to move on our drawings. The last thing on here I want to talk about is the plot. A lot of times we put information on our drawings that needs to be on there for our purposes, but we don't necessarily want it to be printed onto a drawing. An example of this was when I worked for an architect doing O'Reilly automotive parts, because all O'Reillys are similar, but depending on where it was located, we had to do different things. So when you first opened up the drawing to start a new O'Reilly's, there were notes on the drawing to the side that you needed to go through and check to see if it pertained to your building. We always kept those notes on there, but we never set them to print so that when you would print the drawing, they would not show up. That's what this category does here. So if I click on the printer, you see it puts a little circle with a diagonal line in it. So right now my center line is scheduled to not print. So if I were to go to print, and I'll just do a quick PDF, and I'm just going to window, and if I do a preview, you're going to see that that yellow circle is not on here. It's still in my drawing, it just doesn't print. So that is another tool that we can control with our layers. There is one last tool that I want to show you that you're going to need for your assignment today. Typically when we have a circle, we need to have a center point. The center point is what we use to locate the circle. So if I go to my Annotate tab, which I have Home, Insert, and Annotate, and I click on that tab, you'll see over here in the middle I have something called center lines, and I have a center mark. I'm going to click on that center mark, and then I'm going to click on my circle, and you see it put in a center mark. One thing you will notice though, that AutoCAD is not smart enough to know to put that on the center line layer. It did make the right line type, but it did not put it on the right layer. So I need to make sure that that is on my center layer. So anytime you add a mark, you want to make sure that you are on your center layer or that you move it. So I would make sure that I added center marks to all of my circles. So that is another tool that we can use to do that. These center marks can be adjusted, but for now we're not going to be concerned about that. However they come in, as long as there's a center mark there, that is all that I care. So now that you know all about layers, one thing to remember is you are to never ever draw on layer 0 unless you are directed to. It is considered the sacred layer. Now we are ready to go over your assignment.